are watching Voice of Canada and this is Sana Haroon. Mr. O'Toole has consistently said assault weapons would remain banned. We would not repeal the ban on assault weapons, said spokesperson Chelsea Tucker.
We will maintain the ban on assault weapons. We will also, as I said today, work with police on gang violence, which has gone up incredibly over the last few years, and target the illegal smuggling of firearms. If you speak to police and law enforcement, the increase in violence in our cities is driven by organized crime, by street gangs using illegally smuggled firearms. We will go after it. As I've said, we will maintain the ban on assault weapons, and we will make sure that we work with police and we work to make sure that there's a transparent process to keep people safe and to make sure that we tackle rising gun violence, particularly through organized crime and gangs. We need to stop the smuggling and have...
Most Canadians are warming up to Conservative leader Haroon and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh as the election campaign goes on. A new poll suggests but Liberal leader Justin Trudeau is still seen as the best choice for Prime Minister.
34% of Canadians still believe Justin Trudeau would make the best Prime Minister, a number which is down 5 points since the beginning of the election. The Conservatives' Haroon O'Toole is at 29%, which is up 4 points, while the NDP's Jagmeet Singh is up 6 points to 29%. Also changing since the first week of the campaign, Jagmeet Singh is now the leader Canadians trust the most, surging 5 points to 21%. Justin Trudeau is now second, dropping 6 points, but still a point ahead of the Conservatives' Haroon O'Toole, who gained a point to 17%. When asked who would say anything to get elected, Trudeau and O'Toole bumped up 2 points, while Singh dropped 1.
Prior to the election campaign, what we saw was that Haroon O'Toole, in particular, was having a very hard time introducing himself to Canadians. That's changed. The other thing that we saw is that while Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party, had a certain appeal with Canadians, it wasn't a specific type of appeal. It didn't really define itself in a really clear way, other than people just felt a little more positive about him. But overall, people really only saw that there was one person who was in the position to be the Prime Minister, and that was Justin Trudeau. That's changed now that we're into this election campaign, and the other two candidates are getting better defined and are much more competitive with the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, than they were prior to the campaign. If anything has happened in those first 2 weeks, it's really been the closing of the gap between Justin Trudeau as a national leader and his two major opponents. For Haroon O'Toole, less about sunny ways and more about competence. Where he seems to be getting stronger against the Prime Minister is everything that has to do with managing the government and competence. So really where Justin Trudeau seems to be losing is not to specifically any individual candidate, it's specific aspects of what his litigating the performance of the government over the last 6 years. The leader who's in the best position to do that is Jagmeet Singh. And if he feels that he's in the position where he can even challenge the Liberal Party as potentially being the official opposition and replacing them with the NDP through the course of this election campaign, that's when Jagmeet Singh becomes incredibly dangerous for the Prime Minister. Because you can see on all the issues that relate to sunny ways and credibility, particularly on progressive agenda items, Jagmeet Singh is in a pretty strong, got less so in 2019, but is personified this government for the last 6 years, is the profile and position of the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, relative to his competitors. What's happened during the course of this campaign is he's come back to earth. He's now really seen as in a similar bracket has really dissipated. The problem that creates for them is now they have to start relying on things like policy and other sorts of things that they've really not necessarily been their strengths, through the course of the last 6 years. And the biggest asset that they previously had, which was the Prime Minister's profile, has now become a bit of a weight for them. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that.
After months of COVID-19 travel restrictions, Canadians are flying to see family and friends or to take long overdue vacations time, but staffing at major carriers has not kept pace.
It's called revenge travel. After months of COVID restrictions, Canadians are flying to see friends and family or to take long overdue vacation time, but staffing at major carriers has not kept pace of delayed and canceled flights and what they say is insufficient customer service. Aviation experts believe staffing shortages are calculated. Airlines just didn't hire enough staff during the summer, anticipating a fall slowdown as people return to work and school. Business travel volume isn't expected to be enough to make up the difference. Instead of potentially hiring and then laying off, they're plodding along, often at the expense of the customer. It tells Global that it currently has more than half the number of active employees it had pre-COVID, though it planned to operate at about 35% of its capacity during the summer of 2019. It says the impact of COVID-19 on the entire air transport industry was extreme and unprecedented. Restarting such a complex industry that was dormant for so long is a challenge for all industry participants.
It's only 2 weeks until Election Day as it draws closer. More voters are beginning to solidify their decisions on who they will support, but according to polling done exclusively, that number so far sits at 46%.
46% of voters say they're absolutely sure of who they will vote for come September 20th, with Conservative and Liberal voters the most concrete in their vote choice at 49%. NDP and Bloc supporters are less certain, and Green Party supporters are the least confident in their choice. The numbers also indicate it's the NDP that has the most room to grow. 22% of those who indicated a first-choice party said they would consider voting for the NDP, with the Liberals, Conservatives, and Greens lining up behind them.
Election campaign. So there's a lot of opportunity here still for movement. The biggest potential movement is between the Liberal Party and the New Democrats. So what we're seeing in this election campaign so far is that the biggest challenge in many ways for the Liberal Party has been the New Democratic Party. These are disappointed progressive voters who were previously voting for either the Green Party or for the Liberal Party, who are now giving the NDP a very serious look and have moved over to them through the course of this election campaign. And one question that has always proven to be incredibly accurate in terms of the dynamics of the campaign and predicting where things are going is asking people which party is gaining the most popularity and momentum. The Liberal Party going in the other direction. And interestingly, it's not just people voting for the opposition parties who feel that way. It's also people who say that they're currently voting for the Liberal Party who feel that way. So that just shows you what's happening in this election campaign. Started off, on 3 weeks ago, trying to get out of the blocks ahead of the opposition parties, and tripped on the way out, and have simply not recovered. A problem that they're going to be dealing with that they have to change around, but also you're going to see an increasing amount of attention for the Conservative Party and its leader, Haroon O'Toole. And the question is, over the next couple of weeks, will he be able to stand up to it? What we saw in the last election campaign was that his predecessor, Andrew Scheer, was not able to deal with it. Let's see if Haroon O'Toole has made a difference. As the biggest challenge to the Liberal Party going forward is the potential that more progressive voters who are currently with the Liberal Party and are disappointed that they were put in to this election circumstance and are disappointed with the Prime Minister, more and more are taking a serious look at Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. And if that happens, the potential that the Liberal Party could go down even further than it is right now certainly exists. Yes, the NDP will win more seats as a result of that, particularly in places like British Columbia and Ontario. But also what you're going to see is going to divide the vote in a lot of ridings where they weren't competitive in previous elections among progressive voters that are going to create opportunities for Conservatives to make some pickups.
Conservative leader Haroon remains under fire for flip-flopping on gun policy, which has now also resulted in a recent amendment to the Conservative platform.
Now, the NFA has fiercely opposed Liberal attempts to tighten gun laws, and in this recording, which the Liberals provided to Global News, Delory is making the case that the NFA needs to politically mobilize itself to defeat Liberal MPs.
We're going to be building something here a permanent structure within the NFA to really to give ourselves a much louder voice in the ridings as well, to make sure that politicians are hearing us loud and clear.
Fast forward 2 years, and Delory is first managing Aaron O'Toole's run for Conservative leader and is now running the National Conservative election campaign. But O'Toole says Delory did not formalize any relationship between the National Firearms Association and the Conservatives.
There is zero quid pro quo.
Delory, through a party spokesman, confirmed what his leader said and noted that he had severed his business relationship with the NFA more than 2 years ago, before the last election. On top of that, when it came time to endorse a candidate in the Conservative leadership race of 2020, the NFA did not endorse O'Toole, it endorsed Derek Sloan. But O'Toole may have trouble with some in his own caucus on this issue. Hours after O'Toole said Sunday that he would keep the Liberal restrictions in place, an incumbent Conservative running in a southeastern BC riding, Rob Morrison, said on Facebook, quote, "The Conservative position has not changed and is as it always has been. We will repeal the Liberal gun ban." O'Toole on Saturday said Morrison is incorrect.
I'm the leader, and we will have an approach focused on public safety, focused on maintaining restrictions in place and having a review of our classification system that removes the politics from this.
But O'Toole's flip-flop on guns is now ammunition for his opponents, who say he cannot be trusted.
Canadians are beginning to know what those of us who watch him in the House have known for a long time about Aaron O'Toole, is that he'll say anything to try and get elected.
People's Party of Canada leader Maxi Bernier has become a rallying figure for voters who strongly object to lockdowns and other measures, and while political voters say it's unlikely the party will win any seats, it could eat into Conservative support.
His supporters who protest at Justin Trudeau's rallies. But after gravel was thrown at Trudeau, Bernier tweeted, "Some idiot threw pebbles at Mr. Trudeau yesterday. I condemn it. Words are our weapons, but physical violence is always wrong." Bernier notes when he was egged last week in Saskatoon, none of the other leaders came to his defense. Bernier has become the political champion for some opponents of vaccination passports and mask mandates. He himself was charged for defying Manitoba public health orders in June when he failed to do a 2-week quarantine.
What if you're arrested again today?
In parts of Manitoba with the lowest vaccine uptake, that is very popular. Still, for a growing number of people, Bernier is giving voice to their concerns they hope he will take to Ottawa.
The rise in Islamophobia in the US after 9/11 prompted these 3 Muslims to move to Canada. Now, after 2 decades, they see worrying signs emerging here.
So I'm a Palestinian Canadian. I grew up in the city of Jerusalem. I'm the eldest of 3 boys. After high school, I moved to the US in the pursuit of higher education. I spent most of my time in Michigan, where I did my PhD at the University of Michigan. I got married 2 months after 9/11, and my wife joined me in the US. And this is when I started to realize the struggle that a Muslim woman goes through if she's not in a welcoming, inclusive environment. We've had experiences where someone would shout at us, "Bin Laden, go home," or we've had an experience where we once got lost on a hike, and so it got really late, and we finally made it to the road and flagged someone, and I think they pulled over, but when they saw my wife, they said, "No, sorry, I can't help you," and they drove off. And I think that's when I started preparing my papers to apply to immigrate to Canada.
Yeah, just sticky yarn.
What happened to it?
I'm first generation American. My parents immigrated from Lebanon, and I grew up in the suburbs of Houston, Texas in the 80s and early 90s. And we were the only Muslim family in our school. There wasn't really anyone else who shared my faith or who looked like me as a Muslim in America. When we were in Philadelphia, an incident happened where a severed pig's head was thrown over one of the local Islamic schools in Philadelphia, and pig's blood was also thrown over the playground. That was the type of situation that for me was like, okay, it's time to really see what life is like in other places.
keeping the Muslim identity was a struggle after 9/11. It's continuous fear. It's bad for your. Everyone was okay. Lunchtime comes and friends were saying, "Oh, did you hear what happened? Your Muslim people attacked New York." What we didn't understand is like, what do we have to do with this? This is a terrorist group, bad guys that ended up doing this. What does that have to do with us? As a child, I still couldn't comprehend that this was something that reflected on my identity as a Muslim. When I moved to Canada, I was 16 years old. I was in high school. My first impression, I was very impressed. I was like, you know what? This is different. It's like almost like you had a honeymoon phase where you moved from the US with this extreme fear and you came to Canada and everything was beautiful. I went to high school with just one incident. It was almost like I had this phase where we didn't have any issues, but these hate speeches continued to increase and we're starting to see extreme behavior now.
Like every other Muslim in Canada, I am paying attention to the rise of Muslim hate and Islamophobia that's happening around the country. And it almost feels like a very similar wave of instances and situations happening in Canada as well. As Muslims in Canada, I really hope that my kids can live as proud Muslims, and find acceptance and not feel like they have to constantly challenge a negative stereotype or narrative about Islam or about their faith.
9/11 made me more cautious. I had to walk sometimes looking behind my back. It's fear, right? This 9/11 incident and the hate that it brought continues to put us in fear every day. Wow. My hope is when my children grow up, they don't have to experience Islamophobia in a personal level or in a community level. We want it to be an issue that is resolved, and no one has to ever face being afraid because of the religion they believe in.
Canada, it's a multicultural country. It's a country that prides itself on diversity, and yet we've been the country in which some of the worst Islamophobic violence has taken place. So I don't know if things are getting worse, but I think we're definitely confronting a challenge, and it's a serious challenge. Courage is I think, to me, is a very important quality that we have if we're going to be able to confront Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, other forms of prejudice and racism.
Okay.
Really nice now, like people.
So I'm the father of 4 wonderful children, and obviously, I really hope for them just to feel normal. I want my kids to think that, I am a member of a big Canadian family that's 40 million strong. Just a normal member of that family who's pursuing their destiny as everybody else is. But I hope also that
several party leaders are speaking out as protest on the campaign trail, especially those against Liberal leader Justin Trudeau become more violent.
The insults from the angry crowd have become routine. But names are one thing, actual stones, another. That spray of gravel got the attention of the main party leaders.
Nobody. We live in a great democracy, and let's act like we do.
Justin Trudeau has started calling them anti-vaxxer mobs. While there are lots of people with anti-vaccination signs, PPC! There are also growing numbers of PPC supporters. This candidate says they're fighting for the right to make decisions about brought her 3-year-old.
Just to show that I want freedom for my daughter, but Trudeau should be standing up for the people. Because all of this is all just lies. There might be a virus going on, but we can't shut down the whole world.
The Liberal leader hasn't been the only target.
As Canada prepares to allow non-essential travel from nearly anywhere in the world, the country walks a fine line between needing to reopen and fears over the 4th wave of COVID-19.
It's been rough times for tourism during the pandemic. In better times, half of the customers who ride this boat would be tourists. and the manager is ready to welcome back international visitors. Back in early August, double-vaccinated travelers from the U.S. were given the green light to come to Canada for non-essential purposes. And officials say the testing and surveillance those taking in the sun on Granville Island and enjoying staycations, there are mixed feelings.
We should wait longer. Definitely, it's too early. At least let's get this, the fourth wave pass.
I guess if you're double vaxxed and you wear your mask inside all the time, I feel okay about it.
There is still so much uncertainty as Canada takes this step out of the pandemic and reopens its doors to the world.
Keep watching Voice of Canada. For further updates, visit our website voiceofcanada.tv.